Good morning, pumpkins. Welcome to your English class. I know that this is a bit different. I miss you guys. I hope that you and your families are doing well. Okay, let's get started. We're going to cover Unit 3, Lesson 5, which is going to cover present tense. Okay, before you get started, I need for you to grab a pencil, grab either loosely paper or your English notebook because throughout the lesson you will be pausing and taking notes, and it's important that you have that with you. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so here we go. We are going to cover pages 104 and 105. I've uploaded the book pages for you guys in case you don't have your book, and for those that have your book, you can use it throughout the discussion, although I've created a PowerPoint presentation for you guys, so it's really not necessary at this point. Okay, so when we talk about a present tense, just so you know, a verb that when we are talking about the present tense, the word tense talks about time. And when we're talking about present, we're talking about the today, the things that are, that you are working on today. Okay, so a verb that tells what its subject is doing right now, it's in the present tense. And I know that you guys watched the video where it talks about the present continuous, and then it talks about the present tense. And I hope that you were able to identify, to understand the difference between these two. Okay, the present continuous is when you have a helping verb and the verb ends with ing. For example, I am helping my mother right now. I am teaching you guys about the present tense. I am talking to you guys through a microphone. I am sitting on my chair. And these are the things that I'm doing right now. I am reading the book. I am writing. I am taking notes. But when we're talking about the present tense, we're talking about things that you do in your everyday life. Like when you wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth, and you eat breakfast, you ride to school, back when, the good old days. Um, and that's the tense that we're going to cover today, the simple present tense. Okay, when we're talking about the present tense, you have to understand that the present tense is sort of married. It has a relationship sort of with the subject. Why do I say this? Because when you're working with the present tense, you have to keep your eye on the subject. You have to look at the subject to decide what is going to happen to the verb, because two different things can happen, and that's what I'm going to discuss with you today. Okay, so a verb that tells what its subject is doing right now, it's in the present tense. I already explained the difference between present continuous and the simple present tense, which is what we're covering today. You change the form of a verb in the present tense when a singular noun is the subject. And this is something that you really have to understand. When it says you change the form of a verb, and that's important that you understand. When you're working with a singular noun, when the subject is singular noun, this is when you guys are going to add s or es to the verb. This is when the verb changes the form, okay? So the subject plays an important role, okay? So we're not just gonna focus on the verb, we're also gonna focus on the subject when we're talking about present tense. And I want you to notice the S added to C in the example, in example number 1, because we are going to go over these examples together, okay? So example number 1, the ranger sees the camper. Now, ranger is the subject, and you know that ranger is a singular subject. It's talking about one ranger. So notice that we added an S to the verb see. So now the ranger sees the camper. It would be incorrect to say the ranger sees the camper, okay? Let's go to example number 2. The campers wave. We identify the subject, campers, and by looking at the word campers, you realize that campers is a plural subject. So the information that we read before said that you change the form of a verb in the present tense when a singular noun is a subject. So it tells us what to do when the subject is singular. It says that you're going to, that the form of the verb is going to change. You're either going to add an S or an ES according to the rule, which we are going to discuss in a few minutes, okay? But what happens when the subject is plural, such as this one, the campers wave? Notice how wave stayed in its base form. We did not add an S or anything else. The verb stays in its base form, okay? And let's go to the second, to the next example, excuse me. I wave. We identify the subject, I, and although I is a singular subject, right? Because we're just talking about ourselves. I wave. Notice that the verb also stayed in its base form. We go to the next example, you wave. We identify the subject you, and we notice the same thing, that the verb stayed in its base form. Okay, and why is this? Why is it that I, you, although they seem to be singular subjects, why are we treating them as if they were plural subject? Well, these two are different. They are exceptions to the rules. You know that I always tell you that English is very complex and it has many, many exceptions to the rules. I and you will be treated as if they were plural subject, okay? So when you have a plural subject and when you have I or you, the form of the verb does not change. And it's important for you to remember that, okay? You do not change the form of verbs when they're used with plural subjects or with I or with you. And I hope that you guys are with me so far, okay? So, in other words, when you have a singular subject, the verb changes according to the rules, okay? It could be by either adding an S or an ES or changing the Y to I and adding ES, and that's what we're going to discuss in our next slide, okay? If you have a plural subject in the sentence, or if you have I or you, which are the exceptions, the verb stays in its base form. It doesn't change, okay? Now, let's look at the two different examples. We're using the exact same verb in its base form, carry. And when a verb is in its base form, it means that it's not in the past tense, it's just in its base form. Nothing is added to it, it's just in its simple tense. Okay. So we have carry in its base form, and then we have the boy blank it everywhere, right? The boy blank. And in this case, we already have the answer. The boy carries it everywhere. And the reason why we changed the Y to I and added ES, we're going to learn soon why we did that. But the main focus here, what I want you to focus is on the subject. The subject is singular, so the verb changes. It changed from carry to carries according to the rules. So we're going to review in just a minute. And then we have the same example. We have the same verb, and it says the boys carry it everywhere. So in this second sentence, in this second example, although we have the exact same verb, it changed in this sentence and it was kept in its base form because the subject is plural. Okay, so when the subject is plural, or when we have the exceptions, I or you, the verb is going to stay in its base form. Okay, so one changes, the other one stays in its base form. And that's pretty much what you need to understand. As long as you're able to understand this concept, that if you have a singular subject in the sentence, then the verb changes according to the rules. There are 3 rules that we are going to practice, that you have to memorize, that you have to get to know these rules in order to be able to form the present tense correctly. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so these are the three rules, and this is where you are going to pause, and you are going to copy 1, 2, and 3. You may copy the examples as well so that you know what it means, okay? So let's go over the rules. Rule number 1, most verbs add S. That's what we're going to do, to most. Notice that it does not say to all verbs. It says to most. So to most verbs, to form the present tense, we are going to add an S. So get, which is in a space form, is going to change into gets. Play, which is in its base form, is going to change to plays. Jump changes to jumps. Now, don't forget that this is depending on the subject. You have to keep your eye on the subject, okay? Let's go to rule number 2. Verbs ending in S, CH, SH, X, and Z, we add ES. And if you look at the ending of each and every single one of the verbs on this section, you're going to notice that they end either with S, X, CH, Z, X, SH, S, and SH, okay? So if you're working with verbs that are ending with, that have these endings, you're going to add ES to form the present tense, okay? Now don't forget that the verb only changes if the subject is singular. So it's important for you to keep your eye on the subject, okay? Let's go to rule number 3. Verbs ending with a consonant and Y, we're going to change the Y to I and then add ES. We change the Y to I and add ES. And I know that that sounds familiar because we worked with the rules similar to this when we were working with nouns, okay? Don't get confused. Don't forget that we're working with verbs, the word in the sentence that tells you what the subject is doing, and it's different from nouns, which is a word that names a person, a place, a thing, or idea. So stay with me, okay? A verb. Okay, so here it talks about verbs ending with a consonant and Y, and let's just do a little review on what a consonant is. If you were to say the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and you know the alphabet, you would remove the vowels. And if you need to copy the alphabet and you need to divide it or separate the vowels A, E, I, O, and U from the alphabet so that you have a list of the consonants, go ahead and do it. It's no problem, okay? But I need you to understand that there's a difference between vowels and consonants, okay? So it says here that for verbs ending with a consonant and Y, you're going to change the Y to I and add ES. So let's look at the first one. Try. Try, you immediately notice that try is a verb that ends with Y, okay? Now, you have to look, what does it mean? Verb ending with a consonant and Y, Mrs. Villahermosa, I don't get this. What do you mean? Well, you notice immediately, it's easy to notice that this verb ends with Y. That's the easy part. Now, I want you to look at the letter before the Y, this one right here, R. And you're going to think, or you're going to look at the list that you made with the alphabet, dividing the vowels and the consonants, and you're going to see, is R a vowel or is R a consonant? R is a consonant, right? Letter R is a consonant. So it would follow this rule that says verbs ending with a consonant and Y, because verb try ends with consonant Y. So what do we do to form the present tense? We change the Y to I. Here it is. We change the Y to I, and then we added ES, okay? Same thing with empty. Empty is a verb that ends with Y, and the letter before it is a T, which is a consonant. So empty ends with a consonant Y. So we would change. Rule number 3 would apply to this verb because it ends with consonant Y. So we change the Y to I, and then we add ES. Same thing as carry. But you got to be careful with this, okay? Carry is a verb that ends with Y, and before the Y, again, we have an R, so we change the Y to I, and then we add ES. Okay, and you guys are going to get more practice on this. But for now, I want you to pause the video and I want you to copy these 3 rules in your notebook or in the loose leaf paper. If you want sticky notes and you have different color sticky notes and you want to put rule number 1 in a yellow sticky note and rule number 2 in a different color one with the examples, same thing for number 3, you can do it, okay? As long as you keep it safe and you write that these are rules for forming the present tense. Okay, so pause it, and when you're ready, then you can hit play, all right? Okay, so if you're on this page, I assume that you already copied the 3 rules, that you looked at the different examples, and that you're ready to try it out. We're working again on page 104. So if you want to follow along, using the book, you may do it. You don't need to copy this in your notebook. We're discussing it as we were doing class, okay? We're just having a class discussion. You don't need to copy this in your notebook. Okay, so what is the correct present tense verb form for each sentence? And then we have the bird blank, the alarm blank, the boys blank, we blank, dad blank, and the baby blank. We have 6 sentences. And when we're working with the present tense, again, I am going to remind you that the present tense carries and holds a close relationship to the subject. So you are going to look at the subject, because if the subject is singular, the verb changes according to the rules. If the subject, is plural, then the verb is going to stay in its base form. Okay, so singular subject, verb changes according to the rules. Plural subject, the verb stays in its base form. So let's start. The bird. So when we're talking about a bird, we know we're talking about a singular subject, so we know that the verb changes according to the rules. And what rule applies to hatch? Look in your notes and tell me what is the rule number that you would use for this one. If you said rule number 2, you are correct. Rule number 2, because hatch is a verb that ends with S, CH, SH, X, or Z. So if we have a verb that has those endings, we add ES to it. Perfect. Let's go to number 2. The alarm blank. Alarm. We're talking about a singular subject. And we say that when we have this singular subject, we know that the verb is going to change according to the rules. Let's look at the verb. Buzz. Buzz ends with Z. Let's go back to the paper with the rules and tell me what rule applies to buzz, a verb ending in Z. Again, if you said rule number 2, you are correct. In this case, because the verb ends with a Z, we add ES at the end. Perfect. Sentence number 3, the boys blank. Now we look at the subject because when working in the present tense, we have to keep an eye on the subject. You identify boys as being a plural subject, and we already talked. Singular subject, the verb changes according to the rules. Plural subject, the verb stays in its base form. So in this case, because boys is a plural subject, the verb is going to stay, and that's a mistake that I have to fix. The verb stays in its base form. So the boys rush, right? Okay, just bear with me for a minute, and then we can continue. So the boys rush. You don't change the verb because the subject is plural. And the rule tells us that plural subjects, verb stays in space form. Number 4, we blank, and the verb in its base form is talk. Now, if you don't know how to form the present tense for talk, let's go over all of the rules. And let's do what we call the process of elimination. Let's see. We have rule number 1 that states most verbs, we're going to add an S. But I'm not sure, right, Ms. Vilmos? I'm not Sure, that's what I have to do. Let's look at rule number 2, verbs ending in S, CH, SH, X, and Z. Let's look at the verb talk. Does verb talk end with Z, SH, Z, S, and SH? No, it doesn't. So rule number 2 would not apply to verb talk. Okay? Then we go to rule number 3, where it states verbs ending with a consonant and Y. We change the Y to I and add ES. Talk does not end with Y, so rule number 3 would not apply, which means that rule number 1 to most verbs at S would be the one to work with this one. This is the rule that we have to apply, rule number 1. Okay, let's go to sentence number 5. And I hope that you guys are following with me. I hope that you are understanding this. If you do not, you can go back, you can hit pause, you can go over the book, go over the pages that I uploaded. If you have any questions after this, you can email me and I'll gladly explain it to you. But I hope that you are able to follow with me, okay? I know that I'm being very repetitive, but there are 2 things to do. You need to look at the subject. Singular subject, the verb changes according to the rules. So if you see that the subject is singular, you go to the rules, you check to see which rule applies to the verb that you're working with, and then you either change it, right? If it's singular, you're going to change it according to the rules. But if the subject is plural, that means that the subject is talking about more than one person, place, or thing, then that means that the verb is going to stay in its base form. Okay, number 5, dad blank. And we have worry in its base form. Now, dad is talking about one person, dad. So we know that it's a singular subject. And by now, because I've repeated it so much, you should know that a singular subject changes according to the rules. If you want to write that somewhere, singular subject, that means that the verb changes according to the rules. Plural subject, the verb stays in its base form. You do not change it. Okay. So we identify that dad is a singular subject, and we have worry. And we don't know what to do with worry. How do I form the present tense? I go to the rules. I go to number 1, number 2, and number 3. And I immediately identify that worry, it's a verb that ends with Y. So let's see if rule number 3, which is the rule that covers verbs ending with a consonant and Y, if we can use it here. It says verbs ending with a consonant and Y, change Y to I and add ES. Consonant and Y. Don't forget that we have vowels. So we need to make sure that not only does this verb end with a Y, but also that before the Y, that there is a consonant. You cannot have a vowel. Okay, because if it was a vowel, we would apply rule number 1. Okay, but in this case, worry ends with a Y and it has a consonant before it. So yes, we would use rule number 3. So we change the Y to I and then we add ES. Perfect. Sentence number 6, the baby blank. And here we have the verb fuzz. We identify that the verb fuzz ends with an S. So we would use the rule that talks about verbs ending in S. Is there a rule that talks about that? Is there? Yes. If you said rule number 2, then yes, you would just add ES, because to verbs ending in S, CH, SH, X, and Z, we would add ES. And I hope that you guys are with me, that you're following it. Don't forget that for sentence number 1, we applied rule number 2. For sentence number 2, buzzes, we used rule number 2 to form the present tense. For sentence number 3, we did not use the rules because the subject is plural, and because the subject is plural, we have to leave the verb in its base form. And, oh, wait a minute. We talk. This is incorrect. We talk. I apologize for that. I just noticed that. We talk because we is plural. We're talking about more than one. The verb states in its base form. And if you caught that, if you're like Miss Mosa, number 4 is incorrect because I'm not. This is not rehearsed. I have my book here and I'm teaching it to you guys the way I would if I was in the classroom. So, I make mistakes. So just bear with me, okay? Because if you caught it, then you're getting this, okay? Because yes, number 4, we is a plural subject, which means that the verb is going to stay in its base form. And by now, if you're working with your parents, you're telling them, see, I told you that the teacher had it wrong. And that, that happens. I did make that mistake. I just noticed. So if you caught it, that means that you're actually getting this, okay? At number 5, we identified the subject, dad, which is a singular subject. So singular subject, the verb changes according to the rules. And for this verb, we used rule number 3, which talks about verbs ending in consonant and Y. Number 6, the baby fuzzes, and we changed the verb because the subject is singular, okay? And for fuzzes, we applied rule number 2. Okay, so it was a good thing that I went over this page again. So now, are you guys with me? Let's continue. Okay, we're now on page 105, and we're going to continue to work on your own. It's from 7 through 14 in this case, because I was not able to fit all 15. But if you want to practice on your own with number 15, that is perfect. Okay, so number 7, the sun blank brightly in the blue sky, and the verb in its base form is shine. So the sun blank. Notice that the sun, we're talking about one thing. In this case, the subject is singular. So for this verb, we just add an S, okay? Perfect. The sun shines brightly in the blue sky. Number 8, only one cloud blank overhead. Only one cloud. We're talking about cloud, just one, which means that the verb is going to change according to the rules. And we are using rule number 2 for this verb. So it's only one cloud passes overhead. We add ES because the verb ends with an S. Number 9, Roger blank to the weather report, and the verb in its base form is listen. So what's going to happen to listen? Is it going to change, or is it going to stay in its base form? Well, let's look at the subject. Roger. Roger is a singular subject, which means that the verb is going to change according to the rules. And for listen, we would follow and we're going to use rule number 1. So it would say, Roger listens to the weather report, okay? Now, number 10, you blank a picnic lunch, says mother, and her base form of the verb pack, it's in the parentheses. So you blank, and our verb is pack. Now, we talked about singular subject, plural subjects, but we talked about some exceptions. Remember those exceptions? Yes, I, and the other one, you. So whenever you see I or you, when you have I or you in the sentence as the subject, right? You are going to treat it as if it was a plural subject, which means that the verb is going to stay in its base form. So you pack. What is going on here? You pack. So you pack a picnic lunch, says mother. Okay? Let's go to number 11. Roger blank to her request quickly, and the verb is reply. Now, 2 things that we need to look at. We need to look at the subject, and we also need to look at the verb, okay? So we first look at the subject, Roger. Roger is talking about just one person. So if it talks about one person, is a singular subject, which means that the verb is going to change according to the rules. So now that we identify that the subject is singular, we go to the rules and we check to see which rule would apply to reply. And because reply is a noun that ends with consonant Y, consonant L, and Y, we use rule number 3, which talks about verbs ending with a consonant in Y. We change the Y to I and add ES, okay? Number 12, we blank to the center of the lake, and our verb is row. We look at the subject, and we're talking about we, so we know that this is a plural subject. We're talking about more than one person. And we know that when the subject is plural, the verb is going to stay in its base form. So the same thing here. Excuse me. We row to the center of the lake. The verb stays in its base form because the subject is plural. Okay. Number 13, mother blank from the rowboat. We have the verb fish, and you have to be careful with fish because, as I've said many, many times, don't forget that a word in English can act as different things. For example, the word fish can act as a noun, but it can also act as a verb. Okay, if you're talking about the fish, the ones that live in the ocean, then we would say, the fish is beautiful, or the fish was tasty. But in this case, we're talking about the verb, the action. Like when you go fishing, like when you see people in the movies trying to catch the fish. Okay, so we look at the subject. The subject, we're talking about mother, which is one person. We know it's a singular subject, so we know that the verb is going to change according to the rules. You go over your rules and you identify the fish is a verb that ends with sh, which would follow under rule number 2. So we add es at the end of fish. So it would read, mother fishes from the rowboat. Okay. Let's continue. Number 14, we have I blank a fish on the end of my line. And then the verb is lose. I is a subject that it's an exception, right? So we're going to treat it as a plural subject, which means that the verb is going to, and I'm doing this so that just to make sure that you guys are listening to me and you can catch me on my bloopers, okay? So it would be I loose a fish on the end of my line. Because I is an exception, the verb is going to stay in its base form. Okay? Are you guys with me so far? So let's review. For number 7, shine, shines, we applied rule number 1, where we just add an S to the verb. Okay? Because the subject is singular, we add an S to the verb, the sun shines. For number 8, we applied rule number 2 because the verb ends with an S. And when you have a singular subject and the verb ends with S, we apply rule number 2 that states that we add ES to form the present tense. For number 9, listens, we applied rule number 1. For sentence 11, we applied rule number 3 because this is a verb that ends with a consonant Y. So we changed the Y to I and added ES. And for sentence number 13, we added ES because the verb ends with SH and we followed rule number 2. Okay? So I hope that you guys were able to understand. If you don't, please email me. Now it's time for you to practice. I want you to work on extra practice page 140. For those of you that do not have your book, I uploaded extra practice page 140 for you to have it available through Google Classroom. You need to copy it out. You need to read the directions and follow the directions. You're going to work on all 3 sections, the circle, triangle, and the square, and you don't have to copy the directions. You don't have to copy the examples, but you do have to follow the directions and you have to look at the second part of the example to see what it is that you have to do, okay? So guys, I hope this helps. Again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to email me and talk to me about any of your concerns. Um, Again, I apologize for the mistakes. I'm still getting the hang of this, most definitely. I miss you guys so much. I cannot wait to get back to the classroom, okay? Love you guys. Bye-bye.